Thank you very much, Hans. Thank you very much, and it's my pleasure to be here today. I'm Duncan Gibb from the Regulatory Assistance Project, as mentioned, a senior advisor at RAP. I've been at RAP for about a year. I joined our Europe team based all over Europe. We have an office in Brussels. We have colleagues in Brussels, of course, in the United Kingdom, in Hungary, Netherlands, and in France, where I'm based. Within RAP's Europe team, I work in the heat and efficiency unit team, and we occupy ourselves with big questions around decarbonizing heat, the technologies and data and policies needed to do so. We have a lot of different types of publications that come out quite frequently, so I'd encourage you to check out our website if you're looking for more information on this topic. Today, we're talking about a subject that's quite near and dear to many of our hearts at RAP, and that's how we successfully achieve a heat decarbonization, heat transition, especially for the lowest income households. This is a topic we've been working on for quite some time, whether it's specifically on the heat topic or just the impacts of energy efficiency and how that can lower energy bills for those who have the most difficulty affording them. This is a topic that RAP has been quite involved in for many years. So we're happy to expand this more specifically to clean heating itself. So let's get into it. There we go. So yes, this presentation is based on a study that was led by my colleague Louise Sunderland, came out in December last year. And we posed ourselves the question here is, what specific criteria do we need to take into consideration when thinking about getting low-income households specifically off fossil fuels for heating? This is obviously a really big rising topic in Europe. So we have an EU focus of this work. We wanted to point out also that it's an early stage piece. It's an overview of kind of the situation. And some of the vulnerabilities that low-income households have, some of the strategies for helping reduce bills and get them onto clean heat solutions, such as heat pumps. But at this stage, the presentation itself might actually raise more questions than answering them. And hopefully that will stimulate quite a few questions from the audience. We're looking forward to those. So basically what we want to do is see how we get more clean heat solutions into households that are already struggling to pay their energy bills. Now, the first question we could ask is, why are we focusing on heat? That's the easy one to answer, probably the easy one of the day. About half of the energy used in Europe is for heating and cooling. I'm sure many of you know this. This is also true on a global scale. Within this, globally, it's about 50-50 building heating and industrial heat. In Europe, I believe there's a bit more buildings than industrial process, but regardless, it's a large amount of final energy being used for heat. Within Europe itself, it's mainly based on fossil fuels. This is something that everybody knows. More than 65% of Europe's space heating needs are still met by fossil fuels. It's mainly natural gas, mainly fossil gas. It's been quite astounding to see the progress in reducing gas consumption in Europe, especially in imported Russian gas, in the last year for obvious reasons, but there's still quite a long way to go. So if we're looking at how to reduce the amount of fossil fuels in heating, we can look at a number of different scenarios. 20A level shows a mass role of heat pumps, that heat pumps are expected to play in cutting fossil fuel use in heating. On a European level, we know this is true as well. We've seen this in various prepared by the European Climate Foundation, Cambridge Econometrics, McKinsey. We also want to point out that before 2030, there's a rough estimate that you can see on the slide here. Meet the Fit for 55 reduction target by 2030, about 1 in 4 homes are expected to replace their heating systems. This is kind of to put things into a contextual scale based on the impact assessment. So there's no target for this or anything, but roughly this is the number of heating systems that will need to be replaced, which isn't including new buildings, but the actual replacements within this time period on the slide. So we're looking at heat pumps, district heat obviously playing a big role, as well as solar thermal, and some biomass, which I'm aware is a controversial topic. In the other category, I want to mention the role of geothermal as well in decarbonizing heat in buildings. I believe that to be quite an important technology too. In this context of decarbonizing heat is let's say, framed by a lot more policy ambition at a European level. Many countries are mandating the end of sales for fossil fuel boilers in many different ways, whether it's banning new grids, new connections to the gas grid for new buildings, such as in the Netherlands, or just banning the installation of new boilers, or coming up with new types of regulations, such as in Germany, where a minimum threshold of renewable energy needs to be met for new heating systems. Starting next year, there's a lot of phase-out policies that are coming into place. And the European Union itself may ban fossil fuel boiler sales starting in 2029 through its eco-design directive. So this is kind of a wave of new policy that's expected to further accelerate the transition away from fossil fuel heating. And as always, we want to make sure that those who can least afford to heat their homes are not overwhelmed by this and are not do not fall victim to this transition. So we need to provide funding to help support them. That's part of it. And these are the solutions we'll get into in a bit. But one thing we also wanted to point out is that a lot of countries are still subsidizing fossil fuel heating. In some cases, I mean, we can feel quite conflicted about these subsidies because, yes, it's a subsidy to install a gas boiler, but it's also sometimes they're also provided or very useful to households who are put in situations of distress, who might have an appliance break down in the middle of winter and need to replace it urgently and don't have 4,000 or 5,000 euros that they can just pay within the next week to do so. Yet we also know that we need to find the right balance, and we can't continue to subsidize the installation of fossil fuel boilers when they need to be so quickly phased out. So we know that about 11 of 27 EU countries still provide subsidies for fossil fuel boilers. And this is something we're continuing to take a look at. And yeah, it's something to keep in mind, to put this all into context for the clean heat transition for low-income households. Where are the euros being spent towards for this transition? So before we get into the results of our work, if we bring it all together, we know that there's a lot of poverty in Europe in general, and also energy poverty. So even before the current energy crisis, 50 million Europeans lived in energy poverty. This is expected to have been this number is expected to have grown significantly over the past year. We know that these populations are being put at risk because of volatile prices. These are the homes, the people who are less able to respond to these changes in energy price. They're vulnerable, and we know that staying on fossil fuels is not the solution for them. Even if these subsidies exist to help in situations of distress, we know that this can't be a long-term solution to continue to subsidize this. So we also know that we need to consider low-income households not only for morality's sake, for making sure we don't leave people behind in the transition, but also understanding that there will be no transition to a low-carbon Europe without making these households front and center. So when we're thinking about how to get clean heat solutions into buildings, into low-income households, we ask ourselves, of course, what are the most affordable clean heat options? And something that's important to understand is on a running cost basis, this is some work from IEA's recent report on heat pumps. On a running cost basis, there are a lot of energy bill savings that are already there. Of course, generalizing Europe into one set of energy prices is tricky, but it puts into context that for low-income households, you can see this on the left bar, low, there's a significant share of household income that can already be saved by switching from a heat pump to a gas boiler. And these are pre-crisis prices as well. So that puts it into a bit more context. With higher gas and electricity prices, more so gas prices, the savings become even greater. And this is not considering the upfront cost of the technology. This is just saying if you could wave a magic wand and switch from a heat pump to a gas boiler from one day to the next, how would that affect your energy bills prior to the gas crisis? And we know, looking over the longer term, that heat pumps, solar thermal, district heating will be the most cost-effective solutions for heating, not even for decarbonizing heating, but for heating in general. This is a report by Cambridge Econometrics and European Climate Foundation that shows over the period 2030 to 2040, these different forms of heat pumps and solar thermal and district heating is an honorable mention here as well, are the most affordable options to provide heating. So we know that this is expected to be the case, and this is the direction of travel in Europe. We also know that that hydrogen for heating, especially for those who have the most difficulty paying their bills, is not a solution. So if you look at our study and the presentation today, you'll notice that it focuses mainly on heat pumps. The reason for this is that let's say the ownership models, the economics of district heating, and is much different than an individual heating solution. For us, we wanted to look at an economic analysis comparing one technology to another, and it's simpler to look at changing from one individual heating technology to another individual heating technology. There's also a number of different challenges that exist in the regulation and pricing of district heating, the access related to consumer protection and control, and there's a lot of work being done on this by other organizations such as BEIC, the European Consumer Organization, where we didn't want to step on their toes, so we decided to focus on individual solutions only. So let's get into it. The results from our work. If we look at the economics, we use this to frame the solutions that we're going to provide. If we look before the energy price crisis, we chose countries that were very reliant on fossil fuels for heating deliberately. And we tried to choose them based on varying dominant fossil fuel types. So if we look at Belgium and Germany, we're looking at gas boilers. Ireland, there's still a lot of oil furnace heating, oil boilers. And Poland still uses a lot of coal for heating. So we tried to vary this. We looked at the average energy use in households, but we also noted that lower income households tend to underheat. That means that they use up to 20% less energy for heating than the average household in a country. So we wanted to represent that in this figure and in our analysis. So we included that in this hatched part, the part that looks a bit like a candy cane. This shows the effect of underheating. So if you compare, let's say in Belgium, the heat pump to the gas boiler, you can imagine 20% less heat costs for running costs means that if you're going to switch from a gas boiler to a heat pump, you also not only want to switch the technology, but you also want to increase the amount of heat that's being provided. Or, I should mention, you also want to improve the performance of the building. So reduce the overall heating demand so that the increase in heating is less necessary. The point is that the low-income households, because of the bill stress they're under, tend to heat less than would be comfortable, less than average per household. And that depends. I'm saying that in general too, per let's say per square meter, not because they tend to live in smaller homes or anything like that, but actually per square meter, their comfort is suffering. These prices also exclude any available subsidy. This would make them more comparable, but we wanted to look at the raw economic case first before we start taking into account what is the actual real payments people would make. This is based on technology and energy prices of 2021, what it looks like. So if we look at last year, obviously we know that the prices of electricity and of gas have increased significantly in many countries. So if you look at that on the surface, it looks like the economics of clean heat have actually improved. So now in Germany, a heat pump is more affordable in total cost of ownership terms than a gas boiler. Similarly, in Ireland, it's much more affordable than an oil boiler, comparable to a gas boiler. And when you take into account the subsidy, it's much more interesting. Also in Poland. But then we just have to look back a year and remind ourselves that many people in this situation already were having trouble paying their energy bills. So if we go back just 1 year, we see that the affordability has worsened. So relatively speaking, an electric heat solution or a heat pump might be more economic than a gas boiler in 2022. We don't have updated numbers for 2023, but looking at prices in the summer of 2022, yet the affordability has worsened. So it just comes back to one of the points made earlier, which is that these volatile and high energy prices are not a solution to improve the economics of heat pumps. They're not a solution to drive the transition to clean heating. We need stable energy prices, and we need policies that target low-income households. So we see the biggest jumps here, obviously, are in running costs. The upfront costs we assume to be relatively the same. But the huge jumps in running costs in last year, which makes the affordability ultimately worse. It doesn't help people who already are struggling to pay their bills. So how do we reduce these costs? One thing is upfront investment needs to be reduced. That's in the heat pump equation. We'll get into running costs in a sec, but for heat pumps, the upfront cost is often number one barrier. Especially because, as I said, it is paid upfront. So we looked at how subsidy programs around Europe treat this. Specifically, we tried to look at how countries provide subsidies for low-income households. I'm sure many people listening to this understand that subsidy programs tend to favor those who have more means at their disposal, those who are richer. This may be because of the levels of the subsidy. This may be because of the length of the program, or it may be because of the nature of the subsidy. They provide things like tax credits, which can be deducted on your taxes later in the next year when you file them. They aren't always grants or upfront cuts to the initial deployment cost, which is what lowest income households actually need. So we dug a little bit deeper into the subsidy programs, and looking across the 27 EU member states, 25 out of 27 have a subsidy scheme for clean heat. Sounds good, but most of them are what we call fig leaf schemes. This means that they're there in theory, but they might be too small in budget, or they might be too short in the time frame, or they might be too narrow in the scope to be considered significant contributions or support. And they also cater to the higher income households. So we tried to differentiate them by income level. So see which countries provided actual subsidies for lower income households specifically, or provided higher levels. We found 9 countries that did that. When we look at other criteria, such as design suitability for low income households, you can see on the line here where we're looking at the program, it checks a lot of the boxes. So one of them is that it doesn't subsidize fossil fuel systems. It has a budget for low-income households. It has a higher allocation of funding for low-income households based on their household revenue. And I see my internet cable again, but I'm going to keep going unless sound comes in. So we also see that it has a longer budget period. So the French government has a support framework, does enable households to access the support they need. The only downside we would point out on the scheme is that there's a lot of different programs that are input to this framework, and it can be a little bit complex to navigate. And this is a lot of the feedback we've gotten on this system, is that people are not entirely sure how to navigate the scheme, and it changes frequently. So, but in general, of criteria we would encourage to consider when designing a subsidy scheme to enable a transition to for low-income households. So let's talk about reducing running costs. A few points we'll go through here. I won't bother reading them now because we're going to talk about each of them. The first one is to rebalance, let's say, just gas and electricity prices. There's a big problem in European member states where the price of gas is not subject to very high energy taxes and levies, whereas the price of electricity is. This obviously really changes the economic breakdown of a heat pump versus a fossil fuel boiler. We published a study on this last year at RAP. You can see on the reference in the bottom, suggesting some ways to rebalance energy taxes and levies amongst the EU member states. But you can see in many of them can be up to 5, 6, 7 times as many euros per kilowatt hour being put on the price of electricity, ironically often to pay for green energy programs than on gas. So we've seen some work to rebalance these. In the Netherlands, for example, they've shifted the levies away from gas and onto, away from electricity and onto gas. So reducing the taxes and levies on electricity and putting them onto gas. In Germany, they've moved the EEG, the Renewable Energy Law levy, away from the price of electricity, where it used to make up about 20 to 30% of the price. They moved that into the public budget. And in Denmark, they've this is a few years old now, I believe, but they've lowered the tax rate to the minimum above a certain threshold of electricity consumption, meaning that you're incentivized to use a heat pump if you exceed the average electricity household consumption because you have a lower tax rate. So these are some examples that we encourage to achieve better rebalancing of energy taxes and levies. And I would like to mention that the United Kingdom, as part of their review of their buildings energy policy, is considering a rebalancing of energy taxes and levies too. And many countries should look at that. So let's talk about energy efficiency. When it comes to energy efficiency, we think, especially for low-income households, doing this first is a must. Obviously, there's a lot to do with finite resources. And the big question is, where do we deploy these resources? How do we best use them? And we think that using them to provide efficiency for lower income households is the best use of a limited energy efficiency budget. This helps with this hatched area that we showed in the charts, the fact that low income households are underheating. This reduces the running costs, allows their heat pumps to perform better. And we'll talk about this in a moment, but it also gives them more access to use flexibility resources in the future. And we look at a third option for reducing running costs. We see that there are many key winning technology combinations, such as solar PV on the roof, a heat pump in the garden, and some energy storage. All of these help lower energy costs for consumers, and they should be designed with low-income households in mind. So there should be programs that help low-income households access these the most. Those who are both low on funds to pay for them, but also those who are low on time because they might be working multiple jobs. They might not have so much time in the evenings to figure out how a new system works. These systems should be accessible, and this is something that we're encouraging to remove hassle barriers and allow access to things like these technologies and energy-saving renovations. An example of this comes from a program in Scotland put on by Warmworks Scotland and the Angus Housing Association, and they paired up some low-income households in this housing association with a heat pump and on-site PV and battery storage, and just saw some great success in reducing the energy costs, the bill reductions, and a lot of satisfaction. So programs like this can be helpful also to introduce lower income households to what are the emerging trends in the energy system, or how they can better reduce their bills with new technologies. We also want to talk about flexibility. So what we don't want flexibility to look like, or what we don't want to encourage, is people, how do I put this, inconveniencing themselves to access lower energy prices. So it doesn't mean doing the dishes or ironing your clothes at 2 in the morning. What it means is having access to devices that can be programmed So you can displace your electric load to the evening or to times where you have high generation with a solar PV system that ultimately leads to public benefits. And the idea is to access flexibility value that is already there. And this is also a very big benefit to lower income households. Ultimately, this benefits the public, as you can see on the slide, because it leads to lower energy system costs, but it also benefits the households by leading to lower bill reductions by allowing their on-site PV system to heat their homes, or by accessing lower tariffs if they're on a flexible tariff. So we have a few examples on the slide here of different types of innovations that can help access low-income households access more flexibility. The last thing for lowering running costs for heat pumps for low-income households specifically would be new business models such as heat as a service. This is quite interesting because heat as a service essentially allows any sort of consumer to sign up to an energy subscription, similarly to how you would sign up for a cell phone bill. You pay a monthly fee, and with that, an energy company would install a clean heating device, usually a heat pump. They will be responsible for the maintenance and the performance of this device. And this takes a risk this takes the upfront cost burden away from consumers, and especially for those who have the least means for it, and provides, I mean, from the energy company perspective, also provides them with a fixed kind of predictable revenue stream that they can even tap into in the future for more investments in their business. So these are examples of these heat as a service programs that have been popping up around Europe, still mainly in pilot stage, but they're quite interesting, and especially for those who can't afford the upfront costs of changing their heating system or renovating, can be really a very exciting offer. So yeah, when we're looking at heat as a service, these are some of the advantages that I just mentioned. One really interesting thing to point out as well is that it reduces the unexpected costs. This is the third point here on the slide. I think that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that this could be, when discussing subsidies, that some of the poorest households may experience a device breakdown, or they may suddenly have to replace it. These type of unexpected costs then don't exist on a heat as a service subscription plan. So that almost brings us to the end of the presentation. These are the five key ways that we outline in our publication on how to reduce the running costs for running a heat pump for low-income households. We have a few priorities that we mentioned in here as well, mainly the stuff that we've talked about already. So as a summary, we want to make sure that any subsidy programs take low-income households into consideration. I should say that even stronger, actually, not into consideration, but they actually become one of the number one considerations, that the subsidy programs are designed with them explicitly in mind. We also want to make sure that these people who live in the worst performing buildings often tend to be those who have the lowest resources at their disposal. And these are the buildings, the F and G level buildings, that are the most urgent to renovate. And there should be funds that are dedicated and programs that work to make sure these buildings are renovated first, to lower the overall energy demand of these households before switching out a clean heating system. We also want to make sure that in terms of running costs, we're incentivizing the use of heat pumps, the use of electrification technologies, by not overburdening the price of electricity with taxes and levies. And yes, there's work being done on an ETS that prices heating fuels in buildings, but also there's a lot that member states can already do for rebalancing their taxes and levies to put them onto onto more polluting fuels rather than cleaner fuels. Right. So we want to also look at how to allow low-income houses to access programs such as heat as a service. And the last point here is an inclusive innovation. That means when designing a lot of fancy new gadgets and apps that allow people to control their energy use or to optimize things, to take it into account that people who may benefit from this the most may not have a lot of time on their hands to figure this out, or to set it up. So what we want to do is innovate inclusively. This is the term we use for it, and with the understanding that if those who are the most pressed for time and resources are able to figure out how to use your product to optimize their energy use, then that just has societal benefits for everybody. We don't want to just make it for the people who are able to invest a lot of time into figuring out how something works, but we want to take into account those who would have the most benefits from these innovations. So that brings me to the end of the presentation, and I see there's quite a lot going on in the chat and Q&A already. So thanks very much for your attention so far.